In this video, we have a great question from a viewer about tomatoes. Been enjoying tomatoes all season long, cherry tomatoes, beefsteak tomatoes. Season's coming to an end. Should you compost tomatoes? We'll answer that question in today's video. Hi, I'm Amy Landers with GardensThatMatter.com, where we help families create beautiful, bountiful gardens together. And let me read you this question from Lark K. in Williamsport, Maryland. Lark asks, should I compost my tomatoes and other plants when I remove them for the year? This year, after I moved/turned my kitchen compost pile, I ended up with volunteer tomato and squash plants. I have a huge problem with cabbage worm and bean beetles, and I don't know if they will also sprout from composted plants. Great question, Lark. Thank you for sending it in. This is something many of us experience. We have these lush green vines covering our trellises, covered in tomatoes, doing great. And then towards the end of the season, sometimes earlier, we end up with some sort of disease or pest like blight or tomato hornworms that kind of wipe them out. Or at the end of the season, we have a frost and your plants look more like this. What are you going to do with this? This is so much material, especially if you've got a really big indeterminate tomatoes. Can you put them in your compost? Yes, you definitely can, but there's a few things you want to be aware of. So the first thing is seeds. Tomato seeds are very tough little seeds. They're going to survive the composting process unless you get your compost pretty hot for an extended period of time. Now, we have a video about weeds where we talk about some approaches for hot compost and then what to do if you don't think you can get hot compost. So we'll include a link for that in this video. Now, the next question about composting tomatoes is around the disease. If you had something like blight or wilt, can those survive the composting process? What you need to know is these pathogens have evolved to live and propagate inside of living plant tissue. So when they're not in a living plant, they're just kind of dormant. And usually they're dormant in the soil or the leaf litter. So your compost pile is a pretty tough place for those dormant, we'll call them spores. They're not exactly spores, but the dormant form of those diseases to survive. So the heat of your compost pile will probably kill most disease pathogens. Putting your dead tomatoes and other plants into a compost pile is definitely preferable to just letting them decay in place. In our gardens, we're growing pretty intensively, and we're often not able to do big rotations because rotating our crops does break those disease cycles. Sometimes we can't do that. So in that case, you want to be careful to clean your garden well. You do want to put back mulch or compost. You don't really want naked soil, but I wouldn't, for example, mulch with my dead tomatoes in a place where I want to grow tomatoes again next year because those pathogens can survive in the leaf litter and in that soil to reinfect things next year, depending on which pathogen it is. Some are carried by air, some are in the soil, but in general, you want to clean off that old plant material if you're growing in a really intensive space where you know you're going to have those plants there again next year. The other advantage of cleaning your beds of this finished plant material is that it's going to help you break pest cycles as well. You specifically mentioned cabbage worms and bean beetles. I know a lot of people also have squash bugs, and these are organisms that can overwinter in your garden. So cabbage worms will overwinter as the pupa, the little chrysalis of the cabbage moth. Those will kind of be hooked onto plants inside your garden, and then the next year they'll hatch as adults and start laying their eggs on your cabbages and broccolis and cauliflowers. So by removing that plant material and putting it through your compost bin, you are going to kill those pupa. With bean beetles and squash bugs, they overwinter as adults. A lot of times they're going to be in the leaf litter, kind of moist areas at the soil surface. So cleaning your garden beds out is going to help you manage those populations as well. Knock those populations back. They won't be able to survive in your compost bin. The heat won't work for a bean beetle or a squash bug. Now, eliminating these pupa or adult beetles and bugs out of your garden doesn't necessarily guarantee none of those next year. Many of them are really strong flyers and they're going to come in from neighboring gardens or even other regions. But it does give your garden next year a little bit of a head start if you don't have those adults emerging right away when it's warm enough. So your tomato plants, your squash plants, these things, your leftover garden debris can go into your compost pile as long as it's a nice hot pile. Now, if you're not confident about your hot composting, that's okay. Check out the weed video for those tactics to pre-treat your weeds, and you can make sure you're not carrying on any life cycles of pests or disease or the seeds that you don't necessarily want in your garden again next year. Thanks again to Lark for sending in today's question. If you'd like to submit your own question, look in the description for this video and you'll find a link to do that. You'll also find a link where you can sign up for our freebie called The Ins and Outs of Composting. It's a quick reference to all the things that can and can't and maybe shouldn't go into your compost pile. Thanks so much for watching. I'd love for you to subscribe, and if you know somebody else who has a garden full of tomatoes and other material that they're not sure what to do with, share this video with them. Until I see you again, happy gardening!